For a year, my brother's wife paraded around calling me a broke paper pusher while flaunting her supposed wealth in my face. I sat back quietly, smiled, and let her believe every single word she said about my empty bank account. She genuinely thought I was just the tragic poor sister living in a tiny rented apartment barely making ends meet. But when her medical spa empire began to crumble and she desperately came to me for a bailout, the truth I revealed did not just leave her speechless. It legally stripped her of everything she owned. Before I dive into exactly how I orchestrated her downfall, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to play the long game against a family member who underestimated your worth. My name is Zoya, and I am 32 years old. To truly understand the trap I set for my family, you need to understand how they see me. Growing up in our household meant living in the shadow of my older brother Marcus. He was the golden child, the handsome athlete who could do no wrong in my mother Brenda's eyes. I was the quiet one, the dark-skinned daughter, who was expected to stay in the background and cheer for his mediocre accomplishments. When I left for college and eventually started my own business, I decided to keep my success a secret. I knew that if my mother and brother found out I was wealthy, they would demand access to my money. So I drove a modest 5-year-old car, dressed in unbranded minimalist clothing, and let them assume I was a low-level administrative assistant. In reality, I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions, a private equity firm that specializes in buying distressed debt. I manage millions of dollars, but my family remained completely oblivious to my power. The illusion of my poverty was put to the ultimate test on the night of my 32nd birthday. My mother insisted on hosting a celebratory dinner, but it was not really for me. It was an excuse to show off Marcus and his newlywed wife, Chloe. Chloe is a 32-year-old white woman who owns a chain of high-end medical spas in the suburbs. She is loud, obsessed with designer logos, and suffers from a severe white savior complex. From the moment she married Marcus, she treated our African-American family like her personal charity project. She constantly offered unsolicited advice on how we should speak, dress, and manage our meager finances. The dinner took place at an outrageously exclusive country club in Buckhead, Atlanta. It was the kind of establishment with mahogany-paneled walls, heavy crystal chandeliers, and members who speak in hushed tones about their trust funds and winter homes. I did not want to be there, but my mother begged me to attend, so we would not embarrass Marcus in front of his new wife. When I arrived, I found myself seated at a long, grand table surrounded by a dozen of Chloe's wealthy white friends. They were women who spent their days drinking expensive wine and judging anyone outside their tax bracket. My mother and brother sat near the head of the table, practically glowing, just to be in the proximity of Chloe's perceived elite status. The evening dragged on, filled with condescending remarks, disguised as polite conversation. The waiters in crisp white uniforms had just cleared our dinner plates when Chloe decided it was time for her main event. She stood up, smoothing down her custom-tailored dress, and tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal wineglass. The sharp clinking sound commanded the attention of the entire room. All conversations stopped and every eye turned to her. She reached down under the table and hoisted a massive bright green shopping bag onto the pristine white tablecloth. With an exaggerated sigh of pity, she reached into the bag, pulled out a handbag, and tossed it directly onto my lap. It landed with a heavy thud. It was a Gucci tote. Or rather, it was a terribly constructed counterfeit Gucci tote. I could immediately see the crooked stitching, the stiff, unnatural handles, and smell the sharp chemical odor of cheap plastic lining. "Happy birthday, Zoya," she announced loudly, ensuring the tables next to us could hear every single word. "I know your little paper pusher salary cannot afford real luxury, so I thought I would bless you with this tonight. Take it, hide your poverty when you go out to meet your little clients. Oh, and do not worry about the dinner check. I already paid the bill, so you do not have to scrape your pennies together." A collective gasp rippled through her group of friends, followed by a smattering of condescending giggles. I sat there perfectly still, tracing the cheap, peeling leather of the counterfeit bag with my fingertips. I felt the heat of dozens of eyes burning into my skin. The disrespect was so blatant, so perfectly calculated to humiliate me in a room full of people who already looked at me like I did not belong. Chloe stood there beaming with the smug satisfaction of a predator who had just cornered her prey. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to shrink into my chair and cry tears of gratitude for her fake charity. She wanted the entire country club to witness her benevolence toward her poor black sister-in-law. I looked at her real Gucci boots, her Cartier bracelets, and her smug smile. What she did not know was that my simple black dress was a custom Tom Ford piece worth more than her entire outfit combined. I also knew the exact financial reality of her medical spa empire. I knew she was bleeding money, carrying massive undisclosed debt, and barely keeping her head above water. This arrogant display of wealth was nothing but a fragile facade, hiding a mountain of financial ruin. She thought she was publicly bearing my pride, but in reality, she had just handed me the shovel I would use to dig her financial grave. I simply looked down at the plastic bag in my lap, took a deep breath, and prepared my next move. I opened my mouth to politely slide the bag across the table and decline her insulting charity, but before a single word could escape my lips, a sharp, blinding pain shot through my left thigh. My mother Brenda, who was sitting directly to my right, had reached under the heavy white linen tablecloth. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug so deeply into my skin that I was certain she would draw blood. Her grip was like a vice, locking me into place and forcing me to swallow whatever dignity I had left. I turned my head slightly to look at her, expecting to see a face full of maternal apology or at least mild embarrassment. Instead, I saw pure panic masked by a terrifyingly rigid smile. She leaned in close to my ear, her heavy floral perfume suffocating the space between us. Her voice dropped to a frantic, venomous hiss that only I could hear. "Take the bag, Zoya. Smile and thank your sister-in-law right now. Marcus has worked entirely too hard to secure a woman of Chloe's status. Do not you dare embarrass your brother in front of her country club friends. Just swallow your pride and be grateful she even thought of you." The sheer weight of her betrayal settled over me like a heavy blanket. My own mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, was willing to physically hurt me just to protect the fragile ego of her white daughter-in-law. She was so desperate to be accepted into Chloe's world of perceived wealth and privilege that she was actively participating in my humiliation. I shifted my gaze across the table to my 35-year-old brother. Marcus was the golden child, the man who could do no wrong. He was currently swirling a glass of expensive bourbon that his wife had undoubtedly paid for. He noticed the brief hesitation on my part and the tension radiating from our mother. Rather than stepping in to defend his little sister, he decided to twist the knife even deeper. Marcus offered a dismissive shrug and spoke up, his voice dripping with arrogance and casual cruelty. "Come on, Zoya," he said, making sure his words carried across the table to Chloe's friends. "Chloe went out of her way to get you something nice. You should be grateful just to sit in a place like this. Most people with your income bracket only see the inside of this club if they are wearing an apron and bussing the tables. Just say thank you and let us enjoy the night." I stared at the two of them, absorbing the full reality of my family dynamic. They were a united front of toxicity, bonding over their shared delusion of superiority. They did not just tolerate Chloe's disrespect, they welcomed it. They actively wanted me to be beneath them so they could feel better about their own mediocre lives. Any normal person would have thrown the fake bag across the room, flipped the table, and screamed the truth at the top of their lungs. I could have easily pulled out my exclusive black card, called the club manager over, and bought out the entire restaurant right then and there, just to watch their smug faces crumble. But I am not an impulsive woman. I do not deal in temporary emotional outbursts that give my enemies the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I deal in calculated long-term destruction. I looked back at Chloe. She was beaming with the smug satisfaction of a predator who had just successfully cornered her prey. She was waiting for me to shrink into my chair and offer up my pathetic gratitude. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. I took a deep breath, relaxed my shoulders, and let a warm, seemingly genuine smile spread across my face. "Thank you so much, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice soft and perfectly humble. "You are absolutely right. I could never afford something like this on my own. I truly appreciate you taking care of the bill tonight, too. It really means a lot to me. Chloe's chest puffed out with pride. She practically glowed, basking in the admiration of her friends, who were now murmuring to each other about how sweet and charitable she was to her poor black sister-in-law. My mother finally released her painful grip on my thigh, letting out a quiet sigh of relief and returning to her roasted asparagus. Marcus raised his bourbon glass to me in a mock toast, satisfied that the natural order of the family had been maintained and his wife was happy. Underneath the table, completely hidden by the thick fabric of the tablecloth, I calmly reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face with a faint blue glow as I bypassed the security lock and opened my encrypted messaging app. I found the contact for my lead financial investigator at Vanguard Acquisitions. I did not need to type a long, emotional explanation. I only needed to give a single command. My thumbs moved quickly across the digital keyboard. Run a full forensic audit on the tax records, debt obligations, and cash flow of Chloe's medical spa chain. I want to know every vendor she owes, every line of credit she has opened, and every financial secret she is hiding. Leave no stone unturned. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my purse, and picked up my silver fork to finish my birthday dinner. The rest of the evening carried on with Chloe holding court, bragging about her upcoming business expansions and her luxurious lifestyle. I sat quietly eating my steak and nodding along to their arrogant stories. They thought they had successfully put me in my place. They thought they were the ones in control, dining at the top of the social hierarchy. But as I chewed my food and listened to their hollow laughter, I felt a profound sense of peace. The wheels were already in motion. While they were busy celebrating a counterfeit bag, I was quietly initiating the corporate machinery that would systematically dismantle their entire lives. Let them enjoy the country club tonight, I thought to myself, because very soon I was going to own every single debt attached to their names. The months following my birthday dinner passed with agonizing slowness. I continued to play my part perfectly to the letter. I wore my plain, unbranded clothing, I drove my modest car, and I smiled politely whenever my mother or brother felt the absolute need to remind me of my lowly place in the world. Meanwhile, my financial investigators at Vanguard Acquisitions were working around the clock, quietly gathering every piece of evidence regarding Chloe's crumbling medical spa empire. By the time the holiday season arrived, I had a comprehensive map of her financial ruin. But I needed to wait for the perfect moment to spring the trap. So on a crisp Thursday afternoon, I packed up my car and drove to my mother Brenda's house for Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving at my mother's house was supposed to be a sacred family tradition, but Chloe had completely taken it over since marrying my brother Marcus. When I walked through the front door carrying a large, heavy glass baking dish filled with my grandmother's traditional baked macaroni and cheese, the tension in the room was already suffocating. Chloe was standing in the kitchen wearing a pristine white silk blouse and holding a glass of expensive imported wine. She looked down at my dish and wrinkled her nose in absolute disgust, as if I had just brought garbage into the house. "Oh, Zoya," she sighed loudly, making sure my mother and Marcus could hear her clearly from the living room. "You brought that heavy pasta dish again. You know Marcus and I are strictly following a clean eating regimen now. I ordered a specialized truffle-infused cauliflower bake from a private health chef in Buckhead. We really need to start educating this family on proper nutrition and elegant dining. Heavy cheese and cheap carbohydrates are just so bad for the heart, and frankly, it is a bit low class for a holiday table." My mother, who had been making that exact macaroni and cheese recipe for 40 years, simply nodded eagerly and agreed with Chloe. She actually took my grandmother's sacred dish from my hands and shoved it to the very back of the kitchen counter, hiding it behind Chloe's pretentious catering boxes. I watched my family heritage get pushed aside for the sake of a white woman's fragile dietary ego, but I said absolutely nothing. We sat down at the formal dining room table, and the entire meal quickly transformed into a dedicated performance celebrating Chloe's supposed brilliance. She spent the first 45 minutes bragging extensively about her business ventures. She proudly announced that she was opening her third medical spa location right in the heart of the city. She painted a glorious picture of a booming empire, talking about high-end laser machines, imported European skincare lines, and a massive waiting list of elite celebrity clients. Marcus sat next to her beaming with pride and looking at her as if she were a billionaire genius. He chimed in repeatedly to tell my mother how incredibly hard his wife works and how her towering ambition is something the rest of the family should desperately aspire to. I chewed my food slowly and listened to her weave this massive web of lies. Thanks to my investigators, I knew for a fact that her third location was funded by a high-interest loan from a notorious predatory lender. I knew her elite laser machines were on the verge of being legally repossessed because she was 4 months behind on the lease payments. She was shuffling credit cards just to make payroll, but I kept my face completely blank, allowing her to inflate her ego like a giant hot air balloon. I knew the higher she floated, the harder the eventual fall would be. Then, as she always did whenever she needed an extra boost of confidence, Chloe turned her attention directly to me. She needed to tear me down to elevate herself even higher. She swirled her wine and looked at me with deep, patronizing pity. "Zoya, I saw you pull up in that old Volvo of yours," she said, shaking her head with a tragic sigh. "It makes me so incredibly sad to see you driving a vehicle like that. The paint is dull and it just screams financial struggle. You are 32 years old now. You really need to start thinking about your future, because that little administrative paper-pushing job of yours is never going to provide the beautiful life you actually deserve." I placed my silver fork down on my plate and looked directly at her. "What do you suggest I do, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly innocent and compliant. She smiled as if she was bestowing incredible life-saving wisdom upon a helpless little child. "You need to start putting yourself out there," she instructed confidently. "Go to nicer upscale bars. Try to meet a successful man who can take care of you and elevate your lifestyle. Marcus and I just worry so much about you living all alone in that tiny rented apartment. You are throwing your hard-earned money away paying rent to some landlord every single month when you could be building a life with a wealthy partner. It is just not a good look for our family to have you struggling out here like this." Marcus nodded firmly in agreement, telling me I should take Chloe's advice very seriously, because she clearly understands how the real world of wealth works. I looked down at my lap to hide the sharp, dangerous smile that desperately wanted to break across my face. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought I was a pathetic, lonely woman living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped rental unit. They genuinely believed I needed a rich man to rescue me from my miserable existence. What Chloe and Marcus did not know was that I did not just rent my apartment. I owned the entire luxury high-rise building. I purchased the massive residential complex 2 years ago through a blind holding company for $28 million. I collected substantial rent from every single tenant in that building, including the neurosurgeons and corporate executives who lived in the penthouse suites above me. I was the multimillionaire landlord she was telling me I threw my money away to. And that reliable old Volvo she mocked was specifically chosen for its top-tier safety ratings and to keep predatory family members from constantly asking me for handouts. I was sitting at a dinner table with a woman who was drowning in over $1 million of toxic high-interest debt, and she was boldly giving me financial and relationship advice. I looked up from my lap and met Chloe's condescending gaze with calm, steady eyes. "Thank you for caring so much about my future, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and unwavering. "I promise you, I am making some very big investments right now. Everything is going to change very soon." Chloe smiled proudly, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that she was the exact investment I was talking about. A few weeks after that toxic Thanksgiving dinner, the fragile facade of my brother's perfect marriage began to show its first visible cracks. It was a late Tuesday evening, and I had just finished reviewing a massive portfolio of distressed assets. I was walking down the long glass hallway of my penthouse apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the illuminated Atlanta skyline. It was a space that commanded power and silence, a sharp contrast to the chaotic financial ruin that my family was currently drowning in. As I walked, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw my brother Marcus calling. It was incredibly rare for Marcus to call me directly unless he needed an audience to complain to or a target to belittle. I took a deep breath, swiped the screen to answer, and lifted the phone to my ear. He started the conversation with a sickeningly sweet tone that immediately put me on high alert. He asked how my day was and made small talk about the weather, acting as if we were the closest siblings in the world. I knew Marcus well enough to know that this sudden burst of affection was nothing but a cheap manipulation tactic. I let him ramble for a few minutes, offering polite, neutral responses while I continued pacing down my quiet glass hallway. Finally, he cleared his throat and his voice dropped an octave, adopting a serious and urgent tone. "Zoya," he said, hesitation bleeding into his words. "I am in a bit of a tight spot right now, and I need a massive favor. Our wedding anniversary is coming up next week, and I need to borrow $10,000. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, staring out at the city lights below me. $10,000. It was pocket change to me, but to a man living paycheck to paycheck on a mid-level marketing salary while funding a fake millionaire lifestyle, it was an impossible mountain. I kept my voice entirely flat and asked him why he needed exactly $10,000 for an anniversary. "Chloe has been under so much pressure lately. With the medical spa," Marcus explained, his voice speeding up as if he were trying to sell me a terrible timeshare. "She is working so hard to expand the brand, and she needs to maintain a certain image for her elite clients. I found a beautiful vintage Rolex watch from a private dealer. It is an investment piece, Zoya. If she wears a Rolex, it shows her clients that she is highly successful and trustworthy. All of my credit cards are temporarily maxed out because of some unexpected business expenses we had to cover. I just need you to wire me the 10 grand. I will pay you back in a few months when her new location starts generating profit." The sheer audacity of his request was almost comical. My brother, who had spent the last 12 months publicly mocking my old car, my simple clothes, and my rented apartment, was now begging me to fund a luxury watch for his racist, manipulative wife. He was asking me to finance the very weapon she would use to belittle me at the next family gathering. He honestly believed that the sister he treated like absolute garbage would eagerly empty her meager savings account to support his delusions of grandeur. "Marcus, I do not have $10,000 to give you," I said, my tone calm and reasonable. "You know I live on a very tight budget. You and Chloe remind me of my lowly administrative salary every time I see you. How could a simple paper pusher like me possibly afford to lend out that kind of money? You are asking the wrong person." There was a heavy, dead silence on the other end of the line. The fake brotherly affection vanished in an instant, replaced by a dark, simmering rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling with anger. "Do not play your stupid little games with me, Zoya. You never go on vacations. You never buy designer clothes. You drive that absolute piece of junk car, and you live like a peasant. You have to have money stashed away somewhere. I am your flesh and blood brother, and I am telling you that I need this money to save my marriage." "I am sorry, Marcus," I replied softly but firmly. "I cannot help you. I do not have it." That was the match that ignited the powder keg. Marcus completely lost his mind. Through the speaker of my phone, I could hear him pacing frantically in his own house, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You are so incredibly selfish," he screamed, his voice echoing harshly against the glass walls of my hallway. "You have always been a bitter, jealous failure. You sit in your pathetic little apartment resenting Chloe because she is beautiful, successful, and everything you will never be. You hate that I married a woman who actually made something of herself while you push papers for a living." I listened to him tear me down, absorbing every vicious word without flinching. He was projecting his own monumental failures onto me, trying to crush my spirit to elevate his own sinking reality. "This is exactly why you are entirely alone," he spat out, the vitriol dripping from every syllable. "This is why you will die old and broke. Nobody wants an arrogant black woman with an empty bank account. You are a miserable burden to this family, Zoya, and you always will be." He slammed the phone down, terminating the call. A dial tone echoed in my ear. I slowly lowered the phone from my face and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. The last remaining shred of familial loyalty I held for my brother completely evaporated in that exact moment. He had chosen his side, and he had handed me the final justification I needed to completely destroy him. Nobody wants an arrogant black woman with an empty bank account, I whispered to myself, repeating his cruel words. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I walked to the end of the glass hallway and opened my laptop. I pulled up the Vanguard Acquisitions master dashboard. Chloe's massive debt portfolio was fully finalized and sitting securely in my hands. The time for playing poor was rapidly coming to an end. It was time to show my brother exactly what a wealthy, arrogant black woman was truly capable of. The very next morning, I walked into the executive suite of Vanguard Acquisitions. My corner office was a fortress of thick glass and dark steel overlooking the bustling financial district of Atlanta. I sat behind my massive custom mahogany desk, sipping a cup of black coffee when my lead financial investigator knocked on the door. He walked in carrying a heavy dark blue dossier and placed it directly in the center of my desk. He did not say a single word. He simply gave a respectful nod and left the room, securely closing the heavy door behind him. I knew exactly what was inside that folder. It was the complete forensic audit of Chloe's medical spa empire. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, taking a long moment to appreciate the sheer weight of the power currently resting at my fingertips. I reached out, opened the thick cover, and began to read the true, unedited story of my sister-in-law's glamorous life. The first few pages painted a picture of absolute financial incompetence. Chloe was completely hemorrhaging money. Her heavily publicized medical spa empire, the one she used to belittle me at every family gathering, was nothing but a fragile house of cards, waiting for a single gust of wind to collapse. According to the audit, she was currently sitting on $1.5 million in toxic debt. She had not paid her high-end Botox and dermal filler suppliers in over 6 months. The state-of-the-art European laser machines she had bragged about at Thanksgiving were all leased, and she was dangerously close to having them legally repossessed by the medical distributors. Her legitimate business lines of credit were completely maxed out, and the exorbitant monthly interest payments alone were swallowing whatever meager revenue her clinics actually managed to bring in. She was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, but both of them were completely broke. This perfectly explained why Marcus was desperately begging me for $10,000 the night before. They were drowning in a sea of red ink and grasping at any piece of driftwood they could find. But staggering financial incompetence was only the beginning of Chloe's monumental problems. As I flipped further into the thick dossier, the numbers took a sudden and incredibly dark turn. My investigator had flagged several highly suspicious accounts that did not match her corporate profile. Chloe was not just a terrible business owner who had gotten in over her head. She was an active criminal. The audit revealed that she had taken the social security numbers of her own employees. The young estheticians and receptionists who worked hard for her, who trusted her for their livelihoods, had their identities stolen by their own boss. Chloe had used their personal information to open multiple fraudulent credit cards. She was using these illegally obtained funds to maintain her lavish lifestyle, buying designer clothes, luxury cars, and staging an illusion of extreme wealth, while her innocent staff unknowingly took the massive hit to their personal credit scores. She was destroying the financial futures of young working women just so she could walk into a country club and pretend to be royalty. And then there was the absolute crown jewel of her stupidity, the grand third clinic she had boasted so proudly about opening. The traditional banks had long stopped lending her money after seeing her disastrous credit history. So, to fund her relentless delusions of grandeur, Chloe had bypassed the regulated banking system entirely. She had taken out a massive off-the-books loan from an underground syndicate. She had gone to dangerous, predatory loan sharks. She had tied herself and my incredibly foolish brother to ruthless people who charged extortionate interest rates and did not rely on standard collection agencies to get their money back. Chloe had essentially signed a deal with the devil just to keep up appearances and ensure she always had a designer handbag on her arm. I sat in the quiet luxury of my office staring at the pages that documented her absolute ruin. I could have easily picked up my phone, called the authorities, and handed over the undeniable evidence of her identity theft. The Financial Crimes Unit would have swarmed her pristine medical spa and arrested her before lunchtime. But putting her in the back of a police car right now was entirely too easy. If she simply went to jail, Marcus and my mother would somehow spin the narrative to make Chloe the tragic victim of a misunderstood business failure. They would rally behind her crying about how unfair the system is, and I would still be the villain who did not help them when they needed it most. They would never truly learn their lesson. I needed to completely own her. I needed to hold every single string of her pathetic life in my hands so that when I finally decided to cut them, she would know exactly who was holding the scissors. I closed the dark blue dossier, feeling a cold sense of absolute clarity. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. My acquisitions director answered immediately. I gave him a set of crystal clear, uncompromising instructions. I told him to contact every single bank, every medical supplier, and every commercial debt buyer currently holding a piece of Chloe's $1.5 million debt. I ordered my firm to aggressively purchase all of it. I wanted Vanguard Acquisitions to buy her equipment leases, her maxed-out credit lines, and her vendor deficits. I even instructed my specialized team to utilize our shadow subsidiaries to buy out the underground loan sharks at a premium. I wanted to own every single penny she owed to the world. My director asked no questions. At Vanguard, we specialized in aggressive corporate takeovers, but this one was entirely personal. Within 48 hours, the paperwork would be finalized. The trap was officially set, and the jaws were ready to snap shut. Chloe thought she was playing a petty game of social status against a helpless poor sister-in-law. She had absolutely no idea she had just walked onto a financial battlefield against a ruthless corporate predator. I was no longer just her husband's annoying little sister with the old Volvo. I was quietly becoming her sole creditor, and I was going to collect my debt in full. Over the next 3 weeks, my penthouse office transformed into a war room. I sat in my leather executive chair as the days blurred into nights, watching the sun rise and set over the Atlanta skyline. With every passing hour, another piece of Chloe's financial existence was legally transferred into my possession. The process was cold, methodical, and utterly flawless. Like an octopus slowly wrapping its tentacles around a drowning prey, Vanguard Acquisitions began constricting every single artery of her medical spa empire. I started with the traditional banks. When my shadow subsidiaries approached the commercial lenders offering to purchase her maxed-out credit lines and defaulted business loans, the bank executives were absolutely thrilled. They had already written her off as a massive financial loss. They practically handed over the promissory notes, eager to wash their hands of her toxic portfolio. Within 5 days, I officially owned the debt on her primary clinic location. Next, I moved on to the medical suppliers. The pharmaceutical companies providing her Botox and dermal fillers were furious that she had ignored their collection notices for over 6 months. My acquisitions director offered to buy her outstanding invoices for pennies on the dollar. They eagerly signed the transfer agreements. By the end of the second week, I held the exclusive legal rights to repossess every single laser machine, medical chair, and syringe in her pristine, brightly lit clinics. The final and most delicate phase was dealing with the underground syndicate that had funded her third location. These were dangerous men who operated outside the boundaries of civil law. But in the world of high finance, cash is the ultimate equalizer. I deployed a specialized team of negotiators through an anonymous shell corporation. We offered the loan sharks a premium payout, a highly lucrative exit strategy that gave them an immediate return on their initial investment without the hassle of breaking legs to collect. They took the money and walked away. Just like that, the most dangerous threat to Chloe's life was neutralized, but only because it was replaced by something far more lethal: me. While I was sitting in boardrooms signing legal documents and quietly building the cage that would imprison her, Chloe was entirely oblivious. Instead of recognizing that the walls were closing in, she doubled down on her manic delusions. The immense stress of her crumbling empire must have pushed her into a state of absolute psychological denial. She decided that the best way to hide her financial ruin was to aggressively project an image of unstoppable wealth. She went on a frantic spending spree, swiping the stolen credit cards of her young employees to fund a lavish lifestyle that did not actually exist. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed on my desk. I picked it up and saw a notification from Instagram. Chloe had posted a new photo, and she had specifically tagged my personal account. I tapped the screen and stared at the image. Chloe was standing in the parking lot of a luxury car dealership, posing next to a brand new, pristine white Porsche Cayenne. A massive red bow was strapped to the hood of the vehicle. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding up the keys with a triumphant, smug smile on her face. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in toxic arrogance. She wrote, "Blessed and highly favored. Another milestone for the empire. Keep grinding, stay focused, and never let the haters bring you down." Then, at the very bottom, she added a direct tag to my account with a special message just for me. "Work hard, Zoya, and maybe one day you will have 1/10 of what I have." Almost immediately, my family group chat exploded with notifications. Marcus was sending strings of fire emojis, praising his wife for being a visionary entrepreneur and a relentless boss. My mother, Brenda, chimed in shortly after, typing out a long paragraph about how incredibly proud she was to have Chloe in the family. Then my mother directed her attention to me in the group chat. She wrote, "I hope you are taking notes, Zoya. This is what a real woman does. She manifests wealth and builds a beautiful life. Maybe if you applied yourself instead of settling for that little paper-pushing job, you could afford a nice car too." I thought about Marcus sitting in his mediocre office bragging to his coworkers about his millionaire wife. I thought about my mother blindly worshipping a woman who was actively destroying lives to maintain a fake country club image. They were so blinded by their own prejudice against me that they could not see the massive sinkhole opening up directly beneath their feet. They worshipped the illusion of wealth while relentlessly mocking the person who actually possessed it. I sat in my quiet office staring at the glowing screen of my phone. I did not type a furious response. I did not block them. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I actually smiled. I picked up my office phone and dialed my lead investigator. I told him to pull the dealership records for the exact Porsche Cayenne featured in her latest post. It took him less than 10 minutes to find the paperwork. Just as I suspected, Chloe did not buy that car. She had leased it using a highly predatory subprime auto loan with an astronomical interest rate, desperately leveraging the last remaining shred of her stolen employee credit lines just to drive it off the lot. She had traded the financial security of an innocent receptionist for a temporary photo opportunity to mock me on the internet. "Buy the auto loan," I instructed my investigator, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of all emotion. "Contact the financing company and acquire the lien on that Porsche immediately. Add it to the master portfolio." "Yes, Mom," he replied, clicking his keyboard. "Consider it done." I hung up the phone and looked out the massive glass window of my office. The city below was moving at a frantic pace, but up here everything was perfectly still. I looked back at the Instagram photo of Chloe smiling so proudly next to a car she did not own, funded by money she did not have built on a foundation of lies that I now completely controlled. She told me to work hard so I could have 1/10 of what she had. It was a hilarious piece of advice, considering that as of 4 o'clock that afternoon, I officially owned 100% of everything she had. The legal transfers were fully executed. The ink was dry. The octopus had completely wrapped its tentacles around its prey. Every credit card, every medical lease, every outstanding loan, and now even the luxury car she was flaunting online belonged entirely to Vanguard Acquisitions. The trap was locked. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. I thought I had uncovered the absolute bottom of their depravity, but I was entirely wrong. A week after I secured the lien on Chloe's ridiculous leased Porsche, my lead investigator walked into my office unannounced. He did not have his usual confident stride. He looked deeply disturbed. He placed a single thin manila folder on my desk and told me I needed to look at it immediately before we proceeded with any further acquisitions. It was a secondary file, an anomaly that his team had just flagged during a deep dive into the corporate accounts of the medical spa. I opened the folder and found a copy of a massive $500,000 cash injection deposited directly into the primary business account just 3 months ago. I frowned, staring at the numbers. This made absolutely no logical sense. No traditional bank would ever approve a $500,000 commercial loan for a business that was already drowning in $1.5 million of toxic debt. Her credit was completely ruined. She had no liquid assets to pledge as collateral. I looked up at my investigator, demanding to know exactly where this money had come from. He simply pointed to the second page in the folder. I turned the page and my blood ran completely cold. The breath was instantly knocked out of my lungs. It was a commercial mortgage agreement, but it was not secured by any property owned by the medical spa. The collateral listed on the legally binding document was a residential address located in the historic West End district of Atlanta. It was a house with a wraparound porch, an ancient oak tree in the front yard, and decades of my family history etched into its wooden floorboards. It was Big Mama's house. It was the home my grandmother had scrubbed floors and worked 3 jobs for 30 years to buy in cash. She purchased that house to ensure our family would always have a permanent roof over our heads. It was a sacred piece of generational wealth passed down to my mother Brenda to hold in trust for the entire family. My hands actually began to shake as I read the details of the loan. How could Chloe mortgage a house she did not legally own? Big Mama's house was entirely in my mother's name. I furiously flipped to the final pages of the document, searching for the authorization signatures. And there it was. Attached to the back of the mortgage agreement was a fully executed power of attorney document. It was signed and notarized, granting Marcus and Chloe complete and total financial control over all of my mother's assets, including her real estate. The sickening reality of what they had done hit me like a physical blow. My mother Brenda has terrible eyesight, and she completely refuses to wear her reading glasses out of pure vanity. More importantly, she trusts Marcus blindly because he is her golden child. Marcus and Chloe had clearly manipulated her. They most likely slipped this heavy legal document into a stack of routine medical forms or tax paperwork. They probably smiled right in her face and told her to just sign on the dotted line to help Marcus clear up some minor administrative issues. They weaponized her absolute love and trust against her. Brenda had willingly handed over the keys to her mother's sacred legacy without even realizing she was signing her own financial death warrant. I sat in my chair, gripping the edges of the manila folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. They took Big Mama's blood, sweat, and tears, and they turned it into a $500,000 collateral loan. And for what? So Chloe could buy more syringes of imported Botox, so she could pay for her fake designer clothes and brag to her country club friends about her imaginary empire. They literally gambled away our family history to fund a counterfeit lifestyle. But the horror of the situation went far beyond the theft itself. The medical spa was completely failing. They were not making the monthly payments on this massive loan. The account was already slipping into delinquency. If they defaulted on this mortgage, which they were absolutely guaranteed to do, the regional bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings. They would send the county sheriff to the historic West End district. They would drag my mother out of the house she grew up in and leave her sitting on the curb with her belongings. The bank would auction off Big Mama's house to the highest bidding corporate developer. It would be bulldozed and erased forever. Up until this exact second, my hostile takeover had been a calculated business transaction. It was a quiet game of chess meant to teach a harsh lesson in humility. But looking at that forged signature on the mortgage document, something inside of my brain fundamentally shifted. I stopped trembling. A terrifying, absolute silence washed over my entire body. I did not feel the urge to scream or throw things across my office. My eyes went completely ice cold. This was no longer about a fake Gucci bag at a birthday dinner. This was a desecration. Marcus and Chloe had crossed a sacred, unwritten boundary. They were willing to render their own mother completely homeless just to keep up appearances. They were predators feeding off their own flesh and blood. The absolute arrogance of these two fools was almost blinding. They truly thought they were untouchable. They thought they had outsmarted the system and secured a secret stash of endless cash. But they were incredibly sloppy. The $500,000 loan was currently held by a mid-tier regional bank that I knew was in the middle of a massive corporate restructuring. That meant the paper on Big Mama's house was floating in a highly vulnerable financial space. I picked up the heavy receiver of my office phone. My voice did not shake. My tone was devoid of any human emotion. I called my acquisitions director and told him to immediately drop every single project he was currently working on. I instructed him to contact the executive board of that regional bank before the end of the business day. We were going to aggressively extract that specific commercial mortgage from their hands before the automatic foreclosure process could even begin to trigger. I was not just going to buy this debt to hold it over their heads. I was going to secure the deed to my grandmother's legacy, and then I was going to use it to completely sever Marcus and Chloe from our family tree forever. The regional bank holding the mortgage on Big Mama's house was a bloated, disorganized institution. They were exactly the kind of bank that would blindly approve a $500,000 loan to a fraudulent medical spa without doing proper due diligence. 2 days after my explosive discovery, my acquisitions director successfully infiltrated their distressed asset department. He confirmed what I already suspected. The commercial loan was in critical default. Chloe had missed 3 consecutive monthly payments because her cosmetic vendors had started demanding cash up front. The bank had officially issued a notice of default, and the final foreclosure warnings were already being printed and mailed out to the historic West End address. I could picture the absolute panic setting in at my brother's house. I could vividly imagine Marcus frantically checking the mail every single afternoon, intercepting the bright red foreclosure envelopes before my mother could see them. I could see Chloe pacing the floors of her failing clinic, biting her perfectly manicured nails, while trying to figure out which stolen employee credit card she could max out next to stall the bank. A weaker person would have driven straight to their house, kicked the front door open, and screamed at them for their unforgivable betrayal. A weaker person would have demanded answers, cried over the broken trust, and begged them to make it right. But I was entirely done with emotional confrontations. Shouting matches only give your enemies a chance to manipulate the narrative and play the victim. Silence, on the other hand, is an absolute weapon. I did not make a single phone call. I did not send a single angry text message. I sat in my penthouse apartment, poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, and let my corporate attorneys do what they do best. The legal maneuver we executed was aggressive and breathtakingly fast. Through one of my anonymous holding companies, Vanguard Acquisitions approached the regional bank with a direct cash offer. We offered to purchase the defaulted commercial note in its entirety, paying off the $500,000 balance, plus all accrued penalties and late fees. For a bank currently desperate to clear toxic loans off their balance sheet during a corporate restructuring, our offer was a total miracle. They did not ask any questions about who was behind the holding company. They simply took the cash and eagerly signed over all rights to the loan. But I was not going to stop at simply owning the debt. Holding the mortgage meant I was still just a lender, and my family would technically still own the property. I wanted the actual physical deed. Because Marcus and Chloe had used the power of attorney to completely encumber the property with a commercial business loan, they had unwittingly stripped away all the standard residential protections. My legal team immediately activated a specialized distress clause hidden deep within the original loan documents. We filed a swift deed in lieu of foreclosure action against the medical spa. Since Chloe had zero capital to contest the filing and no ability to cure the massive default, the property was legally surrendered to the lien holder to satisfy the debt. Within a matter of days, the county clerk officially stamped the transfer documents. The deed to Big Mama's historic house was permanently stripped from my mother's name, wiped completely clean of my brother's fraudulent fingerprints, and securely transferred directly into my personal trust. It was a quiet, rainy evening when the final physical documents arrived at my penthouse via a private courier. I sat alone on my dark leather sofa, the city lights reflecting off the massive glass windows. I held the thick, crisp parchment paper in my hands. I read the exact legal description of the property, tracing my fingers over the typed address where I had spent every Sunday of my childhood. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the smell of her peach cobbler baking in the oven and the sound of her humming while she swept the wooden porch. She had built that house with back-breaking labor scrubbing floors and working late shifts to ensure we would always have a sanctuary. Marcus and Chloe had treated her blood, sweat, and tears like a disposable poker chip. They had tossed her legacy onto the gambling table to fund a fake country club lifestyle. I slowly took a sip of my dark red wine, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue. A quiet, satisfied half-smile formed on my face. The house was safe. The legacy was completely secured. Big Mama's sanctuary belonged solely to me now, and it would never be threatened by their greed again. The most beautiful part of this entire transaction was the absolute profound ignorance of my enemies. Marcus and Chloe had absolutely no idea what had just happened in the background. As far as they were concerned, the terrifying foreclosure notices from the regional bank had simply stopped arriving in the mail. They probably thought it was a clerical error, or that the bank was just hopelessly backlogged and had forgotten about them. They genuinely believed they had somehow dodged a massive bullet and gotten away with their unforgivable crime. They were still living in their luxury apartment, driving their leased vehicles, and pretending to be high society royalty. They did not know that they had just completely lost their entire family inheritance. They did not know that the massive safety net they had always relied upon was permanently gone. My mother Brenda still blindly believed she was the proud owner of a historic family estate, completely unaware that her golden child had thrown it all away in a pathetic attempt to impress his white wife. They were all walking around entirely empty-handed, living in a fabricated reality that I now controlled. I set my wine glass down on the table and carefully placed the deed into my personal safe, locking it away with a heavy metallic click. I had spent the last 12 months allowing them to call me poor. I had sat through their insults, their condescension, and their fake charity. I had let them believe that I was a helpless administrative worker who needed their pity just to survive. But the board was now completely set. I owned the medical spa debt. I owned the credit card defaults. I owned the vehicle leases. And I owned the family estate. I had methodically surrounded the king and the queen and blocked every single possible escape route. The silent phase of my operation was officially over. It was time to pull them out of their delusional fantasy and drop them directly into the nightmare I had built for them. The morning after I locked the deed to my grandmother's house inside my wall safe, the carefully constructed illusion of Chloe's life finally shattered into a million irreversible pieces. I did not have to lift a single finger to start the avalanche. I simply instructed my acquisitions director to unfreeze the legal holds we had placed on her accounts and execute the collection protocols all at the exact same time. The financial massacre began precisely at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. Chloe was completely unaware of the impending doom. According to the panicked timeline I later pieced together from my investigators, she started her day at an exclusive luxury boutique in Buckhead, attempting to buy a new designer dress for an upcoming charity gala. She handed the cashier one of her platinum credit cards, the very same card she had fraudulently opened using the social security number of her 22-year-old receptionist. The cashier swiped it. Declined. Annoyed but trying to maintain her wealthy facade, Chloe handed over a second card. Declined. Then a third and a fourth. Every single line of credit she possessed, including the stolen ones, had been completely frozen and flagged for extreme fraud by Vanguard Acquisitions. She threw a massive temper tantrum in the middle of the boutique, screaming at the retail workers about how rich she was before storming out in total humiliation. But the declined credit cards were only the opening tremor of the massive earthquake. When Chloe finally arrived at her flagship medical spa, her living nightmare truly began. The glass doors to her clinic were propped wide open, but not for elite celebrity clients. A team of aggressive corporate repossession agents had already bypassed her front desk and were actively dismantling her state-of-the-art European laser machines. She screamed at them, demanding they leave her property, but the lead agent simply handed her a thick stack of legal court orders. The medical equipment supply companies, now entirely owned by Vanguard, had authorized the immediate seizure of all unpaid assets. While she was frantically trying to stop the agents from rolling the heavy machines out the front door, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Two men in dark suits walked inside and handed her a massive binder of civil lawsuits. Her pharmaceutical vendors were officially suing her for hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid dermal fillers and Botox inventory. Everything she needed to actually run her business and generate revenue was being legally stripped away from her in broad daylight. The chaos inside the clinic quickly escalated into a full-blown mutiny. Because Vanguard had purchased the fraudulent credit card debt, we were legally obligated to send default notices to the individuals listed on the accounts. That morning, her young estheticians and receptionists opened their mail to discover that they were each tens of thousands of dollars in debt. They realized their beloved boss, the woman who constantly preached about female empowerment and high society grace, had stolen their identities to buy designer shoes and luxury cars. The staff walked out immediately, shouting curses at her and threatening to call the police. Chloe was left standing entirely alone in an empty clinic, stripped of her equipment, her inventory, and her workforce. And then the absolute final blow arrived. The Financial Crimes Division of the State Police had received the meticulously organized anonymous tip my legal team had submitted days prior. We provided them with undeniable proof of the identity theft, the wire fraud, and the forged power of attorney signatures. As Chloe was hyperventilating in the lobby of her ruined spa, two state investigators walked through the doors and served her with an official criminal subpoena. They informed her that her personal bank accounts, her business accounts, and all of her physical assets were officially frozen, pending a massive federal investigation into grand larceny and identity theft. While Chloe's empire was actively burning to the ground, my brother Marcus was sitting in his middle management marketing office, completely oblivious. He was likely bragging to his coworkers about his imaginary country club lifestyle when his personal cell phone began to ring incessantly. It was the human resources department of his own company. They informed him that his wages were being heavily garnished, effective immediately to satisfy a massive court-ordered judgment on a defaulted commercial business loan. Confused and terrified, Marcus quickly logged into his joint banking app to check their savings. The screen loaded and displayed a terrifying number: 0. Every single penny they had was gone, legally seized by the holding company that owned their debt. He frantically called Chloe, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He bolted out of his office and sped across town to the medical spa. When he arrived, he did not find the glamorous, thriving business his wife had always promised him. He found a dark, empty storefront with an official eviction notice taped to the front glass. Chloe was sitting on the pavement in the back alley, crying hysterically with a crumpled criminal subpoena in her hand. In that devastating moment, the blinding arrogance of my golden child brother was entirely shattered. The horrifying reality crashed down on his shoulders. His perfect white savior wife, the woman he had placed on a pedestal above his own mother and sister, was not a millionaire genius. She was a massive fraud, a criminal, and a catastrophic failure who had dragged him down into a bottomless pit of debt. He realized that the extravagant lifestyle they had flaunted to humiliate me was funded entirely by stolen money and predatory loans. He had alienated his only sister and verbally abused me just to protect a woman who had secretly driven their entire lives off a financial cliff. The Rolex he wanted to buy her, the leased luxury cars, the country club dinners, it was all a pathetic illusion. They had absolutely nothing left. The house of cards had completely collapsed, and they were buried underneath the wreckage. I was sitting in my penthouse library, watching the evening rain gently wash against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The silence in my apartment was absolute and profound. It was the kind of deep, settling peace that only comes from knowing your enemies have been entirely dismantled. My phone sat on the heavy oak desk next to a steaming cup of herbal tea. I knew exactly what was happening across the city. I knew Marcus and Chloe were standing in a damp alleyway, surrounded by the wreckage of their fabricated lives. I knew the initial shock was wearing off, and the sheer terror of their reality was finally setting in. Right on schedule, the screen of my phone illuminated, and the device began to vibrate violently against the wood. I looked at the caller identification. It was Chloe. I let it ring 4 times before I calmly reached out, tapped the screen, and placed the phone on speaker. I did not say hello. I simply sat perfectly still and listened. The sound that came echoing through the speaker was a pathetic, wet, gasping sob. The arrogant country club queen was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate criminal frantically searching for a lifeline. "Zoya, please," she cried, her voice cracking and heavily distorted by panic. "Zoya, you have to help me. Everything is gone. The bank, the police, the suppliers, they took everything. They locked the doors. They took my cars. My credit cards are declining and Marcus is screaming at me. You have to help us." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face entirely devoid of emotion. I listened to her hyperventilate. This was the same woman who had tossed a counterfeit Gucci bag into my lap. This was the same woman who told me I was throwing my life away by renting an apartment and driving an old Volvo. Now she was begging the very person she had relentlessly tormented. "I need you to go to a bank, Zoya," she continued, her words tumbling out in a manic rush. "I need you to take out a personal loan. Max out your credit cards. You have good credit, right? Go to one of those payday loan places if you have to. I need a criminal defense attorney immediately, or they are going to put me in federal prison. Please, Zoya, I am your family now. You cannot let them do this to me." The sheer audacity of her request was breathtaking. She had stolen the identities of her own young employees, ruined their financial futures, and forged my mother's signature to mortgage our family estate. Yet in her deeply twisted mind, she honestly believed that I was obligated to sacrifice my own financial security to save her from the consequences of her crimes. She wanted me to bury myself in predatory high-interest loans just to keep her out of a jail cell. Before I could even formulate a response, my phone beeped loudly, indicating an incoming call. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother, Brenda. I pressed the button to merge the calls, putting both of them on the speaker simultaneously. "Zoya," my mother screamed the second the line connected. Her voice was not filled with sadness, it was filled with a frantic, toxic rage. "What is happening to your brother? Marcus just called me crying. He said his bank accounts are completely empty and his wages are being garnished. He said Chloe is under criminal investigation. You need to fix this right now, Zoya." "Fix it?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and flat. "How exactly am I supposed to fix federal fraud and massive corporate debt?" "I do not care how you do it," Brenda shrieked, her panic reaching a fever pitch. "You have a job. You have savings. You need to give your brother whatever money you have hidden away. Take out a second mortgage on that little apartment of yours. Sell your car. Sell a kidney if you have to. Your brother is going to lose his luxury apartment and his entire reputation. You are single, and you have no responsibilities. You have to save your brother. God will punish you if you turn your back on your own blood." I sat there staring at the glowing phone on my desk. The camera of my own mind felt perfectly stable, locked in a tight close-up on my face. There was no shaking, no hesitation, no wavering doubt, just cold, hard clarity. My mother had just told me that my safety, my future, and my actual physical body parts were completely worthless compared to the comfort of her golden child. She demanded I mutilate my own life to shield Marcus from the explosive fallout of his own horrible choices. They were a collective parasite demanding I offer myself up as their next meal. I let their hysterical sobbing and screaming fill the quiet library for a few more seconds. I wanted them to hear the total silence on my end of the line. I wanted them to feel the massive, impenetrable wall that now stood between my reality and their destruction. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the oak desk. I brought my face close to the microphone. "You must be confused," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper that instantly cut through their manic screaming. "You both seem to have forgotten who you are talking to." "Zoya, please," Chloe begged again, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "I am just a tragic, poor sister." I continued quoting their exact insults back to them with surgical precision. "I drive an old, dull Volvo. I live in a cramped, rented apartment. I am an arrogant black woman with an empty bank account. You told me to find a rich man to rescue me. You told me I was a failure who would die alone." "Zoya, do not do this," my mother warned, a sudden trace of genuine fear replacing her anger. I smiled, though neither of them could see it. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. I took a slow, deep breath and delivered the final, absolute blow. "How could my little paper pusher salary possibly save your grand empire, Chloe?" I reached out and pressed the red button ending the call. The chaotic screaming vanished instantly, replaced once again by the soothing sound of the rain hitting the glass. I did not block their numbers immediately. I wanted to see how many times they would try to call back. My phone lit up again and again, vibrating across the desk in a frantic, silent dance of pure desperation. I picked up my teacup, took a slow, satisfying sip, and watched the screen flash until the battery finally died. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even crested over the Atlanta skyline. I walked into my massive, custom-built walk-in closet, sliding my hand along the rows of meticulously organized clothing. I was not just picking out an outfit for the day. I was selecting my armor for the final execution. I bypassed the simple, unbranded sweaters and dark slacks I usually wore to family gatherings. Today, I did not need to hide my wealth or pretend to be a lowly administrative assistant. I reached for a bespoke charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. The tailoring was razor sharp, the fabric rich and unapologetically expensive. As I pulled the jacket from its velvet hanger, I powered my phone back on. The screen immediately flooded with dozens of missed call notifications from the night before, but there were no new voicemails. The frantic terror of my mother and brother had apparently vanished overnight, replaced by a sudden and jarring wave of absolute delusion. I opened my family group chat and scrolled through the latest messages. Sometime around 3 in the morning, Marcus had experienced a miraculous shift in his reality. Instead of panicking about his frozen bank accounts and his wife's impending criminal charges, he had completely convinced himself that he was a brilliant corporate strategist. He had sent a massive block of text to the group chat, bragging about a sudden lifeline he had supposedly secured through his high-level marketing connections. "Listen up, everyone," he wrote, his digital arrogance practically bleeding through the screen. "We are going to be more than fine. I pulled some major strings last night and got us an emergency pitching meeting this morning with Vanguard Acquisitions. They are the biggest, most ruthless private equity giant in Atlanta. They specialize in corporate bailouts and restructuring. I am going to pitch them a $2 million investment strategy to save the medical spa and wipe out the debt. They have billions in capital. 2 million is pocket change to them. We are going to walk out of that building today, richer than ever." I stood in my closet staring at the glowing screen, reading his ridiculous words over and over again. The sheer astronomical irony of the situation was almost too much to process. In his blind, desperate panic, Marcus had frantically searched the internet for distressed debt buyers and corporate bailout firms in the Atlanta area. He had blindly submitted an emergency funding request to Vanguard Acquisitions. He had absolutely no idea that the ruthless private equity giant he was praising was the exact same company that currently owned every single piece of his ruined life. He was bragging about walking into the lion's den, completely oblivious to the fact that his own sister was the lion. My mother Brenda was the first to reply to his absurd message. She responded with a string of praying hands and heart emojis. "Praise the Lord," she typed out. "I knew my son was a genius. I knew you would figure this out, Marcus. God always protects our family. And honestly, it is a blessing that Zoya refused to help us last night. We do not need her little paper pusher pennies anyway. We are stepping into the big leagues now. Do not even bother talking to your sister until she learns how to respect true success." I let out a soft, quiet laugh. They were standing on the deck of a sinking ship, actively celebrating the fact that they had just found a bucket. I slipped into my tailored trousers and buttoned the crisp white silk shirt, feeling the cool, expensive fabric against my skin. I was just about to close the messaging app when a direct text popped up on my screen. It was not in the group chat. It was a private message from Chloe. Despite the fact that her equipment was gone, her staff had quit, and she was actively facing felony identity theft charges, the mere prospect of a corporate bailout had instantly reignited her toxic narcissism. She could not resist the urge to take one last pathetic swing at me. She needed to feel superior one final time before her meeting. "God protects the righteous," she texted me. "We are getting a $2 million bailout today from the top firm in the city. They recognize true potential when they see it. You should have helped us when you had the chance, Zoya. Now you can just sit there in your tiny rented apartment and watch us win. Do not ever speak to me or my husband again." I read her message twice. She was a criminal on the verge of federal prosecution, typing out arrogant threats on a phone bill that I technically owned. It was a fascinating case study in psychological denial. She truly believed that a room full of powerful white male investors was going to take one look at her blonde hair and designer clothes and magically erase her $1 million debt. She thought her charm could manipulate the financial markets the same way she had manipulated my foolish brother. I did not reply to her message. I did not need to. I locked my phone and tossed it into my structured leather handbag. I slipped on a pair of black designer stilettos, the sharp clicking sound echoing loudly against the hardwood floor of my closet. I walked over to the full-length mirror and inspected my reflection. The woman staring back at me was not the quiet, obedient daughter my mother demanded. She was not the jealous, broke sister my brother constantly insulted. She was the chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions, and she was about to host the most important business meeting of her entire career. I grabbed my keys and walked out of my penthouse apartment, taking the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage. My driver was already waiting, standing next to my polished black Cadillac Escalade. He opened the heavy door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather back seat and instructed him to head directly to the Vanguard corporate tower. Chloe told me to sit there and watch them win. I fully intended to grant her that request. I was going to sit right at the head of the boardroom table and watch them deliver themselves directly into my hands. The leather seats of the Escalade were completely silent as my driver navigated through the heavy morning Atlanta traffic. I watched the city wake up through the dark tinted windows, feeling an overwhelming sense of absolute control. While I sat in the quiet, immaculate luxury of my vehicle, I knew exactly what was happening in my brother's apartment on the other side of town. My private investigators had been monitoring them around the clock, and the reports I received earlier that morning painted a truly pathetic picture of their desperate preparations. Marcus and Chloe were frantically trying to dress for the most important performance of their entire lives. But you cannot simply put on a millionaire mindset when you are actively drowning in over $1 million of toxic debt. Marcus had apparently visited a high-end rental boutique the evening before. He was currently squeezing into a rented navy blue designer suit, praying the tailor had hidden the temporary hem. He was a man who had lost his entire savings, his reputation, and his dignity, yet he was desperately trying to project the image of a seasoned corporate executive. I could vividly picture him standing in front of his bathroom mirror, practicing his firm handshake and reciting empty marketing buzzwords. He had likely stayed up all night building a ridiculous slide deck filled with colorful pie charts and fabricated revenue projections, completely blind to the fact that I already owned his actual financial statements. Chloe, on the other hand, was fighting a losing battle against her own physical exhaustion and mounting terror. She had spent the entire previous day hyperventilating in a back alley and screaming at her frozen bank accounts. Her eyes were naturally bloodshot and puffy from crying. She was sitting at her vanity aggressively applying thick layers of expensive foundation to hide the dark circles of her impending criminal charges. She forced herself into a tight, brightly colored designer dress that she had managed to hide from the repossession agents. She strapped on her remaining authentic Cartier bracelets, treating them like pieces of golden armor. She honestly believed that if she just walked into the Vanguard building looking rich and confident enough, the executives would simply hand her $2 million without asking any difficult questions. She treated corporate finance like a high-stakes country club mixer, where a fake smile could erase a felony. Even my mother Brenda was participating in the grand illusion. According to my family group chat, she had put on her finest Sunday church hat and her best pearls. She was riding with them to the meeting, fully expecting to witness her golden child son orchestrate a miraculous financial resurrection. My Escalade pulled smoothly up to the front entrance of the Vanguard Acquisitions corporate tower. The building was a massive monolith of dark glass and steel piercing the gray morning sky. The doorman rushed forward to open my heavy door, greeting me by my title with a sharp, respectful nod. I walked through the grand marble lobby, the sharp clicking of my stilettos echoing off the polished stone walls. Every employee I passed stopped and offered a polite greeting. They knew me not as the quiet sister in the old Volvo, but as the ruthless architect of their massive investment portfolios. I stepped into the private executive elevator, swiped my encrypted access card, and sent the glass box rocketing up to the 50th floor. The main executive boardroom was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. It was designed specifically to make anyone who entered feel incredibly small and entirely vulnerable. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying, terrifying view of the city streets far below. In the center of the room sat a massive custom-built black marble table surrounded by 20 heavy leather chairs. The air conditioning was set low, making the room feel crisp and unforgiving. I did not sit down immediately. I walked over to the head of the table and unclasped my structured leather handbag. It was time to physically set the stage for their execution. My acquisitions director walked into the room carrying a heavy stack of pristine legal folders. He placed them silently next to my chair and stepped back, waiting for my final instructions. I opened the first folder and carefully extracted the original commercial lease agreements for Chloe's ruined medical spa. The documents were stamped with bright red default notices. I placed them neatly on the left side of my designated seat. Next, I pulled out the massive stack of fraudulent credit card statements highlighting the stolen Social Security numbers of her young black employees in bright yellow ink. I arranged these documents meticulously, ensuring the sheer volume of her crimes was visually overwhelming. Then I reached for the most important piece of paper in the entire building. It was the heavily embossed, legally certified deed to Big Mama's historic house. I ran my fingers over the raised state seal, feeling the heavy weight of my grandmother's legacy, completely secured and safe in my possession. I placed the deed directly in the center of the table, right where Marcus would be forced to look at it. I arranged the paperwork with the precise care of a surgeon preparing a sterile operating table. I wanted them to walk into this room and see their entire fabricated lives deconstructed and laid bare before I even opened my mouth. I turned to my acquisitions director and gave him my final directives. I told him to notify the front desk security team. When Marcus, Chloe, and my mother arrived, they were to be treated with the utmost respect. They were to be offered expensive sparkling water and escorted directly to the 50th floor without any delay. I wanted their inflated egos to reach the absolute maximum altitude before I cut the parachute strings. Finally, I picked up my office phone and dialed my corporate attorney. He was waiting in a private office just down the hall with two special agents from the State Financial Crimes Unit. I told him to stay completely out of sight until I pressed the silent panic button hidden beneath the marble table. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. I walked over to the massive glass window and looked down at the tiny cars crawling through the Atlanta traffic. The storm clouds were gathering over the city, matching the dark, heavy silence of the boardroom. My trap was perfectly set. The bait had been taken. Every legal, financial, and psychological weapon I possessed was loaded and pointed directly at the boardroom door. I turned around, walked to the heavy leather chair at the head of the marble table, and sat down. I smoothed the lapels of my Tom Ford suit, folded my hands calmly over the stacked evidence of their destruction, and waited for my family to arrive. While I sat perfectly still at the head of the dark marble table, I reached out and tapped a hidden icon on my laptop screen. A grid of high-definition security camera feeds instantly popped up, illuminating my face with a faint glow. I had instructed my security team to grant me full audio and visual access to their entire journey from the front doors to the 50th floor. I leaned back and watched the live feed as my family stepped through the massive revolving glass doors of the Vanguard corporate lobby. The architecture of the ground floor was specifically designed to make people feel incredibly small. Massive pillars of black marble stretched up to a dizzying ceiling, and the sheer scale of the space usually silenced even the most confident corporate giants. Watching Marcus and Chloe walk through that lobby was like watching two terrified children pretending to play dress-up. Marcus was trying so hard to project authority. He puffed out his chest and took wide, aggressive steps, but the stiff fabric of his rented navy blue suit restricted his movements, making him look rigid and uncomfortable. He kept looking nervously at the polished floors, as if he was afraid of leaving a scuff mark. Chloe was walking right beside him, gripping a ridiculous designer handbag like it was a life preserver. She had layered on so much thick foundation that her face looked like a rigid plastic mask. She was desperately trying to act like she belonged in a building that managed billions of dollars, but her eyes darted frantically around the room, absorbing the intense, intimidating wealth of the space. My mother Brenda trailed slightly behind them, wearing her oversized Sunday church hat and clutching her fake pearl necklace. She looked around with wide eyes, visibly overwhelmed, but she kept her chin tilted up, refusing to drop her haughty demeanor. Marcus approached the grand reception desk. The camera angle from behind the desk perfectly captured the arrogant sneer on his face. He leaned over the counter and announced his name loudly, ensuring the passing executives could hear him. "We have an emergency pitch meeting with the chief executive officer," he demanded, trying to make his voice sound deep and commanding. "We are here to negotiate a $2 million restructuring deal. Tell him we have arrived." The receptionist, a highly trained professional who had received my explicit instructions, did not laugh in his face. Instead, she offered him a warm, deeply respectful smile. "Ah, yes, we have been expecting you," she said smoothly. "The executive board has cleared the schedule for your presentation. Please allow me to offer you some refreshments before you head up." She placed 3 frosted glass bottles of imported sparkling water on the marble counter. Marcus grabbed a bottle and smirked at Chloe. He actually puffed his chest out further, taking this basic hospitality as absolute confirmation of his own elite status. "See?" he whispered loudly to his wife. "I told you they would roll out the red carpet for us. They know exactly who we are." Chloe eagerly took a bottle, taking a long sip. Her hands were trembling so violently that the glass bottle clinked sharply against her teeth, but she managed to force a triumphant smile. A heavily armed security guard politely escorted them to the private executive elevator. The heavy steel doors slid open, and the 3 of them stepped inside the glass box. As the doors sealed shut and the elevator began its rapid, silent ascent to the 50th floor, I tapped my keyboard to maximize the camera feed and turned up the audio volume. Isolated in the soundproof glass elevator, they finally dropped their professional facades and revealed the true depth of their pathetic delusions. "This is it," Chloe Marcus said, running a sweaty hand over his closely cropped hair. $2 million. All we have to do is secure the funding, and we can pay off the medical spa debt tomorrow." Chloe took a deep breath and began aggressively adjusting her tight, brightly colored dress. "Do not worry, Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with toxic confidence. "I know exactly how to handle this. These private equity billionaires are all the exact same. They are always old, rich white men who are completely bored with their miserable wives. They sit in these dark offices all day looking at spreadsheets. They are desperate for a little bit of charm and beauty. She pulled out a compact mirror and checked her lipstick before continuing her strategy. I am going to let you do the talking first, Marcus. But the second he asks about the debt I am going to take over, I will look him right in the eyes, show a little bit of vulnerability, and let a few tears fall. I will tell him how hard we have worked to build this empire and how unfair the banks have been to us. Old white men love playing the hero for a beautiful woman. He will probably wipe our debt completely clean, just to feel like a savior. I will have him eating out of the palm of my hand before the meeting is even over. My mother Brenda nodded vigorously in agreement, completely supporting her daughter-in-law's manipulative strategy. You are a very smart woman, Chloe, my mother said, adjusting her church hat. God gave you those beautiful looks for a reason, and you should use them. This is exactly what real success looks like. You do whatever it takes to secure our family legacy. Brenda paused and let out a cruel, condescending laugh. It really is a massive shame that Zoya could not be here to see this, she sneered. She is probably sitting in some tiny gray cubicle right now, fetching coffee for a middle manager, while my son is negotiating $1 million corporate buyout. She was always so incredibly jealous of you, Chloe. Imagine how bitter she would be if she could see us right now standing at the very top of the city. Marcus laughed, his voice echoing in the small glass space. Zoya will never see the inside of a building like this unless she is pushing a mop, he mocked. Let her stay in her miserable little rented apartment. We are stepping into the elite class today. I sat in the cold, quiet boardroom listening to every single vicious word they spoke. I did not feel a trace of anger. I only felt a dark, overwhelming sense of anticipation. They were so deeply trapped in their own racist and sexist stereotypes that they could not even fathom a reality where a black woman held absolute power over their lives. Chloe honestly believed she could seduce her way out of a felony. Marcus honestly believed his rented suit made him a titan of industry. And my mother honestly believed her cruel insults validated her existence. The elevator chimed a soft, melodic note, signaling their arrival at the 50th floor. I watched on the screen as the heavy steel doors slid open, revealing the thick plush carpet and the intimidating silence of the executive suite. They took one final collective breath, adjusting their fake jewelry and smoothing their rented clothes. They stepped out of the elevator and began walking down the long corridor toward the giant frosted glass doors of the boardroom. I reached out and closed the laptop screen, plunging my side of the room back into perfect stillness. I folded my hands, rested them on top of the legally certified deed to Big Mama's house, and waited for the frosted glass doors to swing open. The heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open with a quiet mechanical hiss. I remained perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair, facing the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling Atlanta skyline. I listened to the hesitant shuffling of their feet as Marcus, Chloe, and my mother, Brenda, stepped onto the thick plush carpet. The sheer scale of the room immediately stripped away whatever remaining fake confidence they had managed to scrape together in the elevator. I could hear their sharp intakes of breath as they took in the imposing black marble table, the state-of-the-art presentation screens, and the chilling temperature of the corporate environment. My back was entirely turned to them. All they could see was the dark silhouette of my chair against the bright gray morning sky. I listened as my brother cleared his throat, attempting to project an air of belonging. He walked toward the center of the room, his hard leather shoes clicking awkwardly against the floor. Chloe followed closely behind him, the heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume drifting across the large space. I could hear the faint rustling of her brightly colored designer dress as she nervously took a seat at the center of the long table. My mother Brenda settled into a chair beside her, murmuring something under her breath about how grand and spectacular the Vanguard corporate headquarters was. They sat in total silence for a long, agonizing minute. They were waiting for a powerful white billionaire to walk through the doors and save their miserable lives. They were waiting for a man they could manipulate with fake tears and empty marketing buzzwords. They were expecting the absolute pinnacle of corporate grace. Slowly, I pressed the tip of my designer stiletto against the floor and gently pushed. My massive leather chair began to rotate. It turned with a smooth, deliberate grace. First, the wide armrest came into view, then the sharp lapels of my custom charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, and finally my face. I brought my hands to rest on top of the legally certified deed to Big Mama's house and looked directly across the black marble table at my family. The boardroom went dead silent. It was not just a quiet room, it was an absolute vacuum of sound. All the air was instantly sucked out of the space. The color completely drained from Chloe's heavily contoured face, leaving her looking like a pale, terrified ghost. My mother's jaw physically dropped her hand, flying up to clutch the fake pearls around her neck. Marcus sat perfectly frozen, his eyes wide and completely unblinking, as his brain violently rejected the visual information it was receiving. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I did not speak. I did not smile. I simply sat at the head of my boardroom and watched their fabricated reality short-circuit. Finally, Marcus blinked. His mind, deeply infected by years of viewing me as inferior, desperately scrambled to find a logical explanation for my presence. He could not process the bespoke suit or the absolute authority radiating from my posture. His crippling arrogance led him straight to the only conclusion his fragile ego could accept. Zoya. He stammered, his voice a weak, breathless whisper that echoed pathetically across the vast room. "What in the world are you doing in here?" I kept my face completely blank, allowing him to continue digging his own grave. Marcus stood up, his rented navy blue suit bunching awkwardly around his shoulders. Panic began to bleed into his tone. "Are you the cleaning lady?" he asked, stepping forward and pointing a trembling finger at me. "Or are you a secretary? Did they send you in here to set up the water bottles and the files? You need to get out right now, Zoya. Get out of this boardroom before your boss walks in and sees you sitting in his chair. You are going to ruin the most important business meeting of my entire life." Chloe suddenly found her voice, her toxic entitlement instantly flaring up to mask her profound confusion. "Are you actually stalking us?" She shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing off the glass walls. "You are so jealous of our success that you followed us to the Vanguard building just to sabotage our pitch. Get out of here right now, you pathetic loser. I will call security and have you fired from your little administrative job. You are embarrassing us in front of the executives." My mother Brenda immediately chimed in, slamming her hand down on the table. "Zoya, get out of that chair this instant," she commanded, using the same harsh disciplinary tone she had used on me since I was a child. "Your brother is about to secure a $2 million investment. Have you lost your mind? Stop playing these stupid games and leave the room before you cost this family everything." They were shouting at me, completely enraged, absolutely convinced that I was a lowly servant trespassing in a kingdom that rightfully belonged to them. I let their insults wash over me. I absorbed every single drop of their ignorance, their hatred, and their blind stupidity. I watched them desperately cling to the dying illusion of their superiority. Then I decided it was time to end the play completely. I picked up the thick, heavy legal folder containing the absolute destruction of Chloe's medical spa empire. I raised it high above the black marble table and slammed it down with every ounce of strength I had. The sound was like a gunshot. It cracked through the boardroom, violently silencing their hysterical screaming. Marcus jumped backward. Chloe flinched, gripping the edges of the table so hard her knuckles turned entirely white. My mother gasped, shrinking deeply into her heavy leather chair. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold marble. I looked my brother directly in the eyes. My voice was low, smooth, and filled with lethal absolute authority. "There is no boss coming through those doors, Marcus." I said the words, cutting through the freezing air of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "I am not the cleaning lady. I am not the secretary setting up your water bottles. and nobody is going to fire me from my own building. I stood up slowly, towering over them from the head of the table. I watched the horrible realization finally begin to dawn in Chloe's eyes as she looked at the expensive cut of my suit and the massive corporate logo etched into the glass wall behind me. "Welcome to my firm," I announced, letting the absolute truth crush the remaining air out of their lungs. "I am Zoya. I am the founder and the chief executive officer of Vanguard Acquisitions. You came here begging for a $2 million bailout. But you are pitching to the wrong person. I am not your savior. I am your executioner." The absolute shock that rippled across their faces was a masterpiece. It was a beautiful, raw display of total psychological collapse. Marcus literally lost his balance and fell backward into his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Chloe began to physically shake her perfectly manicured hands, trembling so violently they rattled against the polished stone table. My mother stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing that the daughter she had spent 32 years treating like dirt was the absolute ruler of the empire they had just walked into. The explosive encounter they had desperately feared had finally detonated, and they were standing entirely unprotected directly at ground zero. The silence that followed my declaration was so absolute it felt heavy enough to crush bone. Marcus sat slumped in his heavy leather chair staring at me with a blank, vacant expression, as his brain desperately tried to rewrite the rules of reality to fit this impossible nightmare. Chloe was hyperventilating her chest, heaving rapidly beneath the tight fabric of her designer dress. Beads of cold sweat began to form along her hairline, mixing with her thick foundation and sliding down her pale, terrified face. My mother Brenda simply stared at the large corporate logo frosted into the glass wall behind me, as if she expected the entire building to suddenly vanish into thin air. Then the most predictable and pathetic thing happened. Marcus completely broke under the psychological pressure and tried to pivot. A sickeningly desperate smile stretched across his trembling face, and he let out a weak, breathless laugh. "Zoya," he stammered, wiping his sweaty palms on his rented navy blue suit. "Zoya, this is incredible. You own Vanguard. You are the chief executive officer. This is actually a massive blessing. We do not even need to do the formal pitch anymore. You can just bypass the board of directors and approve the funding right now. We are family. You can just authorize the $2 million transfer and save the medical spa today. We can keep all of this wealth entirely inside the family." I looked at my brother, feeling a profound sense of disgust. Even now, entirely cornered and stripped of all his power, his first instinct was to demand my money. He honestly believed that the blood running through our veins obligated me to blindly fund his catastrophic failures. I reached out and picked up the colorful, glossy pitch deck he had brought with him. I flipped through the first few pages, glancing at the fabricated revenue projections and the ridiculous pie charts he had spent all night building. I did not smile. I tossed the pitch deck carelessly across the black marble table. It slid all the way to the other side and dropped off the edge, scattering across the thick carpet at his feet. "You want $2 million?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls. "I do not invest in garbage, Marcus. Vanguard Acquisitions is a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. We acquire highly profitable corporate assets. We do not write charity checks to fraudulent strip mall medical spas that are drowning in over $1.5 million of highly toxic debt." At the exact mention of that specific dollar amount, Chloe flinched as if I had physically struck her across the face. Her bloodshot eyes darted wildly around the boardroom, searching for an escape route that did not exist. "How do you know that number?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "How could you possibly know exactly how much we owe? Those are private commercial accounts." I slowly opened the thick legal folder resting beneath my folded hands. I looked directly at her, watching the sweat drip from her chin. "Because I did not just read your financial profile, Chloe." I replied, my tone completely flat and uncompromising. "I bought it. I turned the first page of the dossier, allowing the horrific reality to slowly sink into their bones. Remember the night of my birthday dinner, I asked? Remember when you threw a counterfeit Gucci bag into my lap and told me to hide my poverty? While you were basking in the applause of your country club friends, I was sending a secure message to my acquisitions team. I ordered a full forensic audit of your entire miserable existence. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around and you were mocking my old Volvo, I had already purchased the commercial lease on your flagship clinic. Chloe let out a quiet, choked gasp, pressing her trembling hands over her mouth. Marcus grabbed the edges of the table, his knuckles turning entirely white. When you called me begging for $10,000 to buy a Rolex, I continued, my voice slicing through the freezing air. I was busy negotiating with your pharmaceutical vendors. I bought every single outstanding invoice for your dermal fillers and your Botox supplies. I bought your maxed out business credit lines. I even used a shadow subsidiary to pay off the underground loan sharks who funded your disastrous third location. I stood up from my chair and leaned forward, resting my weight on the cold marble table. I locked my eyes directly onto Chloe's sweaty, terrified face. You came into my building today, hoping to find a wealthy investor who would magically wipe your slate clean, I said, delivering the absolute final blow. But I am not your investor, Chloe. Last week, Vanguard bought 100% of your toxic portfolio. I am your sole creditor. Every single penny you owe to the world, you now owe directly to me. Marcus let out a loud, agonizing groan, burying his face in his hands, as the monumental weight of their destruction finally crashed down upon him. He realized that the sister he had relentlessly bullied and degraded was now the undisputed master of his entire financial universe. And all of that chaos you woke up to this morning, I added, refusing to let them look away from the wreckage. The declined credit cards at the boutique, the aggressive repossession agents hauling away your laser machines, the eviction notice taped to the front glass of your empty clinic. That was not a stroke of bad luck. That was me. I authorized the collection protocols at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. I am freezing your assets right now. As we speak, my legal team is systematically locking you out of every single bank account you possess. Chloe was openly weeping now, her heavy makeup running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. She looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of her designer armor and her racist entitlement. She tried to speak, tried to formulate some sort of apology or excuse, but her throat simply closed up. She was completely paralyzed by the terrifying, icy stare I held her in. The dynamic was completely inverted. She was the helpless beggar, and I was the untouchable billionaire holding the absolute power of life and death over her fake empire. The rapid shift in power left the boardroom suffocating in despair. They had walked in expecting a miraculous $2 million salvation. Instead, they found themselves locked in a glass cage with the exact person they had spent the last 12 months torturing. And I was absolutely nowhere near finished with them. I had established my financial dominance, but there was still one massive, unforgivable crime left to address. I reached into the folder and pulled out the legally certified document sitting at the very bottom, preparing to execute the second phase of my total corporate destruction. I pulled the heavy parchment paper from the bottom of the legal folder. The state seal was embossed in thick gold foil, reflecting the cold, sterile light of the boardroom. Before I could even lay it on the table, my mother Brenda finally broke her terrified silence. She let out a loud, agonizing wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She pushed herself out of her chair and stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the black marble table to keep herself from collapsing. Zoya, she cried, heavy tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her carefully applied makeup. Please, Zoya, I am begging you. Do whatever you want to Chloe. Send her to prison. Take her spa. She brought this upon herself. But please spare your brother. He is your flesh and blood. You cannot destroy his life like this. You have to let Marcus go. I looked down at Marcus. From my vantage point, towering over him at the head of the table, he looked incredibly small. His broad shoulders were slumped beneath his rented suit, and he was trembling so violently that the ice water in his glass rippled. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no sisterly affection, just a cold, sterile emptiness. I did not destroy his life, I said, my voice perfectly level. He did that all on his own when he decided to steal from his own family. My mother blinked, her face contorting in deep confusion. Steal from us? She asked, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? Marcus would never steal from me. I shifted my gaze to Marcus. Tell her, I commanded. Tell your mother exactly how you funded Chloe's third medical spa location. Tell her what you made her sign. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically side to side. He was too cowardly to even speak. He could not look at the woman who had worshipped him his entire life. Since my brother has suddenly lost his ability to speak, I will explain it to you, I said, holding up the thick document. 3 months ago, Marcus and Chloe realized the traditional banks were cutting them off. They needed a massive injection of cash to keep their fake empire afloat, so they brought you a stack of paperwork. They probably told you it was routine tax forms or medical insurance updates. They knew you refused to wear your reading glasses out of pure vanity. They knew you trusted Marcus blindly, so you signed exactly where they told you to sign without reading a single word. My mother was shaking her head, taking a slow step backward. No, she whispered. No, he just needed me to update my emergency contact forms for the hospital. You signed a full power of attorney, I corrected her, stripping away her denial. You gave Marcus complete financial control over all of your assets. And the very next day, your golden child took that document to a regional bank and took out a $500,000 commercial mortgage. I paused, letting the terrible silence stretch for a fraction of a second before dropping the anvil. They used Big Mama's house as the collateral. The sound that escaped my mother's throat was not a scream. It was a hollow, devastated gasp. Big Mama's house was our sacred family sanctuary. It was the physical embodiment of our generational wealth. And Marcus had secretly handed it over to a bank to pay for his white wife's imported Botox and fake designer bags. Brenda turned slowly to look at her son. Marcus? She whispered, her voice cracking with absolute heartbreak. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not mortgage my mother's house. Marcus kept his face buried in his hands, softly sobbing into his palms. He could not deny it. The truth was completely suffocating him. They defaulted on the loan 2 months ago, I continued, completely merciless in my delivery. The bank issued a formal notice of foreclosure. They were going to send the county sheriff to the West End district, drag you out of the house, and auction off Big Mama's legacy to a corporate developer. Your son was going to let you become homeless, just to keep up his country club appearances. Brenda collapsed back into her heavy leather chair, clutching her chest as if she were experiencing a physical heart attack. The betrayal was absolute. The son she had placed on a pedestal had happily sacrificed her to save his own skin. But you do not need to worry about the bank anymore, I said, my voice slicing through her sobbing. I tossed the heavy parchment paper onto the center of the black marble table. It slid smoothly across the polished stone, coming to a stop directly in front of Marcus. He slowly lifted his heavy head and stared at the gold state seal. The house you tried to mortgage, I asked, staring him down. I approached the regional bank and paid off the entire $500,000 debt in cash. I stopped the foreclosure. But I did not do it to save you. Because you burdened the property with a commercial business loan, you voided all residential protections. I executed a deed in lieu of foreclosure against your fraudulent company. I leaned forward, tapping my perfectly manicured fingernail against the thick paper. I transferred the deed to my name. Big Mama's house is completely and legally registered to my personal trust. I own the family estate now, and neither of you will ever step foot on that property again. Marcus stared at the deed, his eyes wide with absolute horror. You took the house, he whispered, his voice breaking. You stole our inheritance. I did not steal anything. I fired back, my tone instantly hardening into pure steel. I rescued it from a thief. You gambled away our legacy, and you lost. But my vengeance was not entirely complete. There was still one final string to cut. I looked at the two of them, watching their arrogant rented clothes bunch up around their defeated postures. "Oh, and Marcus," I added, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. "Did you actually read the fine print on those fraudulent credit lines and equipment leases your wife took out? Because Vanguard Acquisitions certainly did." Chloe let out a sharp, terrified whimper, knowing exactly what I was about to say. When Chloe exhausted all her stolen employee identities, she needed a massive cosigner to secure the final rounds of funding. I explained. "You signed on the dotted line, Marcus. You put your luxury downtown apartment up as cross-collateral for the commercial debt, which means your personal residence is tied directly to the defaulted loans that I currently own." Marcus stopped breathing. His face drained of whatever color was left. "My legal team filed the eviction papers at the county courthouse this morning," I said, delivering the ultimate checkmate. "The property management company has already been notified. Your electronic key fobs have been deactivated. Your designer furniture and expensive clothes are currently being boxed up by my repossession agents to be auctioned off against your remaining debt." I stood up completely straight, looking down at my brother and his criminal wife. As of this minute, I announced the finality of my words echoing through the boardroom. "You are officially homeless." Marcus collapsed completely forward, his forehead hitting the cold black marble of the boardroom table with a dull, heavy thud. A low, guttural sob tore from his throat, echoing pathetically across the vast, quiet room. He had spent his entire adult life building a fragile fortress of arrogance and entitlement, and in less than 15 minutes I had systematically dismantled every single brick. He was no longer the golden child or the successful marketing director. He was a ruined man crying on a table he did not own in a building he had tried to infiltrate. My mother Brenda sat completely paralyzed beside him, staring blankly at the wall as if her mind had simply snapped under the immense weight of the reality I had forced her to swallow. But Chloe was not ready to surrender. Despite being stripped of her medical spa, her leased cars, and her luxury apartment, her deeply ingrained toxic narcissism refused to let her accept defeat. She pushed herself up from the table, her heavy wooden chair scraping violently against the plush carpet. Her face was a horrific mess of running mascara and patchy foundation, but she bared her teeth like a cornered animal. "You are bluffing," she shrieked, her voice cracking into a frantic, hysterical pitch. "You cannot legally do any of this, Zoya. I know people. I have powerful friends in this city. I will hire the most aggressive corporate defense attorneys in the state. I will sue Vanguard Acquisitions for predatory lending practices and harassment. I will drag your name through the mud and expose you for the bitter, jealous sister-in-law you actually are. You think you can just snap your fingers and take everything I have built. You are completely insane." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of rebuttal to her pathetic, empty threats. I simply broke eye contact with her, reached beneath the thick edge of my executive desk, and pressed my index finger against the small, recessed security button. At the far end of the sprawling boardroom, the massive frosted glass doors swung open with a loud mechanical hiss. The sudden noise whipped Chloe's head around, cutting off her frantic screaming. Through the open doors, my lead corporate attorney walked into the room. He was a tall, imposing man with a sharp silver beard and a meticulously tailored suit, carrying a thick black leather briefcase. But he was not alone. Flanking him on either side were two broad-shouldered men with stern, unyielding expressions. They were not wearing corporate attire. They were dressed in dark tactical windbreakers and heavy utility belts. Stamped clearly across the back and chest of their jackets in bold yellow lettering were the words, "State Police Financial Crimes Unit." The heavy silver badges clipped to their belts caught the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. The absolute silence that crashed down over the boardroom was suffocating. The air grew instantly colder. This was the wide shot of their total destruction. My family sitting frozen in their rented clothes at the center of the dark marble table, surrounded by the towering glass walls of my empire, while the full, devastating force of the criminal justice system marched slowly toward them. The two state agents stepped up to the table, positioning themselves directly behind Chloe's chair. She slowly turned to look at them, her eyes wide and completely hollow. All of the fight, all of the aggressive entitlement instantly drained from her body, leaving nothing but raw, primitive terror. "Chloe," my corporate attorney spoke, his voice smooth and incredibly dangerous. "My name is Richard Sterling. I am the Chief Legal Counsel for Vanguard Acquisitions. This morning, my legal team formally submitted a comprehensive forensic evidence packet to the state authorities regarding the operational finances of your medical spa." I stood up from my chair and walked slowly around the edge of the table, my designer stilettos clicking sharply against the floor. "Did you honestly think I would stop at just taking your money?" "Chloe," I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Did you really believe I would let you walk out of this building with nothing but a bruised ego and an empty bank account?" "You did not just make terrible business decisions, you committed multiple federal and state felonies." Chloe began to shake, her entire body trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the table just to remain standing. "You stole the Social Security numbers of your own employees." I continued, making sure my mother and brother heard every single detail of her depravity. "You took the identities of young, hardworking Black women and you ruined their financial futures to fund your fake country club lifestyle. You committed massive wire fraud. You engaged in predatory check kiting. And most importantly, you forged a legal power of attorney document to steal a historic family estate." The lead agent stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of folded warrants from his jacket pocket. "We have sworn affidavits from 7 of your former employees," he stated, his voice booming with absolute legal authority. "We have the digital footprint of every single fraudulent credit card application submitted from your personal computer, and we have the forged notary seal you used on the commercial mortgage documents." A sharp, piercing scream suddenly ripped from Chloe's throat. It was not a scream of anger. It was a scream of pure visceral terror. The illusion was completely shattered. She was not going to a charity gala. She was not driving a leased Porsche. She was going to a concrete cell. She looked frantically at Marcus, reaching out to grab his arm. "Marcus, tell them," she sobbed, her voice dissolving into a frantic, pathetic whine. "Tell them I did not do it alone. Tell them you knew about the credit cards. Tell them we did it together. You have to protect me, Marcus. Please do not let them take me." But my golden child brother, the man who had verbally abused me just days prior to defend his perfect wife, proved exactly how much of a coward he truly was. Marcus violently jerked his arm away from her grasp as if she were covered in a deadly virus. He scrambled backward in his chair, pressing himself against the wall. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," Marcus yelled, pointing an accusing finger directly at his sobbing wife. "She handled all the business accounts. I did not know she was stealing identities. I did not know the power of attorney was forged. She lied to me. She manipulated me. You have to believe me, I am a victim here too." The profound disgust I felt for both of them was immeasurable. They were two parasites actively turning on each other the second the host body defended itself. My mother sat frozen, watching her brilliant, successful daughter-in-law weep hysterically while her perfect golden son begged and pleaded like a trapped rat. The lead agent placed a heavy hand on Chloe's shoulder. "You are officially under arrest for grand larceny, identity theft, and multiple counts of wire fraud," he announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clicking sound echoed sharply across the room as he locked the cold steel tightly around her wrists. Chloe collapsed to her knees, her brightly colored designer dress pooling on the floor as she screamed and begged for mercy that was never going to come. The final curtain had dropped and the execution was absolute. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the vast glass boardroom like a final judge dropping a heavy wooden gavel. Chloe remained on her knees weeping hysterically as the two state agents grabbed her by the arms and hauled her forcefully to her feet. Her brightly colored designer dress was wrinkled and stained with her own tears, and her perfectly styled blonde hair was now a tangled, chaotic mess sticking to her wet face. She was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant country club queen who had strutted into my lobby just 15 minutes earlier. While Chloe was hyperventilating and pleading with the officers, my mother Brenda finally snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. The sight of her precious daughter-in-law in police custody and the reality of her golden son's absolute financial ruin finally broke through her heavy wall of denial. But instead of directing her anger at the two criminals who had actively stolen from her, she did exactly what she had done my entire life. She turned all of her venom directly toward me. Brenda stood up so quickly, her heavy leather chair slammed violently into the glass wall behind her. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure toxic rage. "You are a monster!" she screamed, her voice cracking and echoing wildly across the long black marble table. "You are a cold-blooded, heartless monster, Zoya. How could you possibly do this to your own family? We share the exact same blood. You sat in the shadows for an entire year watching us struggle, watching your brother try to build a life, and you secretly plotted to destroy him. You are sending the mother of your future nieces and nephews to a federal prison. You are throwing your own flesh and blood out onto the street." She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wide and completely deranged. "God is going to punish you for this," she shrieked. "You are a wicked, selfish girl. I brought you into this world, and I am telling you right now that you will burn in hell for turning your back on your own blood. You need to tell these police officers to let her go right now. You need to give Marcus his apartment back. You owe this family your loyalty." I stood perfectly still at the head of the boardroom table and listened to her frantic, hysterical rant. I did not flinch. I did not feel a single drop of guilt or remorse. If there had been a camera zooming in tightly on my face in that exact moment, it would have captured a look of absolute, unshakable peace. A slow, deeply satisfied, and unwavering smile formed on my lips. It was the smile of a woman who had just successfully amputated a rotting, gangrenous limb from her own body. I slowly walked around the edge of the dark marble table, the sharp clicking of my heels cutting through the sound of Chloe's pathetic sobbing. I stopped just a few feet away from my mother, looking down at her frantic face. "Do not ever use the word blood to manipulate me again," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register. "Blood is nothing but a biological accident, Brenda. It is not a free pass for lifelong abuse. Blood does not give you the right to treat me like garbage my entire life, just because I was not born a man. Blood does not give you the right to physically dig your fingernails into my skin at a public restaurant so your son can impress his racist wife." I took another step closer, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "And blood certainly does not give your golden child the right to forge your signature and steal the legacy my grandmother broke her back to build. You want to talk about family loyalty? You happily sacrificed your own mother's historic house just so Chloe could buy fake designer clothes and imported Botox. You are just as guilty as they are because you enabled every single piece of their toxic delusion." My mother opened her mouth to argue, to throw another desperate guilt trip my way, but she had absolutely nothing left to say. Her empty threats meant nothing in a room where I held all the power. I turned my attention to Marcus, who was still pressed pathetically against the far glass wall, trying to make himself invisible. "You told me I would die old and broke, Marcus," I said, reminding him of the cruel words he had screamed at me over the phone. "You told me nobody wanted an arrogant black woman with an empty bank account. Look around you. I own the building you are standing in. I own the debts that are crushing you. I own the house you tried to steal. The only people dying broke today are the two fools who thought they could outsmart a woman they never even bothered to respect." I turned back to my corporate attorney and gave him a single sharp nod. The execution was over. It was time to clear the stage. "Security." I called out, my voice projecting clearly toward the open frosted glass doors. My private building security team immediately stepped into the room, joining the state financial crimes agents. "Escort these two individuals off my property immediately. They are officially trespassing." The state agents began to physically drag Chloe toward the exit. She was fighting them, kicking her expensive designer stilettos against the plush carpet and screaming my brother's name over and over again. But Marcus did not look at her. He was grabbed by my security guards and marched firmly toward the door, his rented navy blue suit bunching up in absolute disgrace. "Wait," I said, raising my hand just as they reached the threshold of the boardroom. The agents paused, turning Chloe around to face me one last time. I walked calmly over to a dark wooden cabinet built into the wall of the executive suite. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the massive bright green shopping bag she had given me at my birthday dinner. I walked across the room and held the cheap plastic-smelling counterfeit Gucci bag out toward her. "Give her back this fake bag," I instructed the lead agent, a cold smile locking perfectly onto my face. "She is going to need something to carry her belongings in when the federal government seizes all of her real designer luggage." Chloe let out one final agonizing wail of pure humiliation. The heavy frosted glass doors swung shut behind them, cutting off the sound of her screams as she was dragged away in handcuffs to face a concrete cell. The toxic tie was officially severed, and I was finally completely free. 6 months have passed since that morning in the boardroom. The corporate execution I orchestrated was swift, and the legal system handled the rest with absolute brutal efficiency. Chloe did not get the aggressive corporate defense attorneys she screamed about. When the federal prosecutors presented the mountain of undeniable digital evidence my team had compiled, her public defender advised her to take a plea deal. She is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. For a woman so deeply obsessed with status and luxury, it might as well be a maximum security dungeon. The sprawling medical spa empire she used to torment me was completely liquidated. Every laser machine, every waiting room chair, and every single syringe of imported Botox was auctioned off to the highest bidder to satisfy her massive debts. The luxury cars she proudly flaunted online were repossessed. Her designer wardrobe, the physical armor she used to project her racist entitlement, was boxed up and sold. The woman who once stood in a country club and told me to hide my poverty is now wearing a standard-issue canvas uniform, living in an 8 by 10-foot concrete cell. Her days of pretending to be a wealthy savior are permanently over. My brother Marcus did not fare much better in the aftermath. The second the handcuffs clicked onto Chloe's wrists, their perfect marriage instantly disintegrated. She tried to drag him down with her during the federal investigation, actively telling prosecutors that he was the mastermind behind the fraudulent loans. While he managed to narrowly avoid prison time because of his sheer documented ignorance, the public scandal completely destroyed his professional reputation. When his marketing firm received the court orders to heavily garnish his wages, they immediately terminated his employment. They did not want a disgraced executive associated with a massive identity theft ring sitting in their office. Without his salary, and with his luxury apartment fully seized by Vanguard Acquisitions, Marcus was thrown out onto the street. The golden child of the family, the man who proudly told me I would die broke, and alone is now working part-time loading heavy boxes in a massive shipping warehouse just outside the city limits. He tried to reach out to me once, showing up at the Vanguard lobby in his faded clothes to beg for a low-level job. My security team escorted him off the premises before he even reached the reception desk. He lives in a cheap rundown motel, paying for his room by the week. He spends his days doing grueling physical labor and his nights staring at the peeling wallpaper of a dingy room, completely stripped of the arrogance that once defined his entire existence. As for my mother Brenda, the loss of her golden child and her pristine daughter-in-law completely shattered her reality. When the deed to Big Mama's house was officially secured in my trust, she had absolutely nowhere left to go. I did not leave her out on the street. I am not a monster, despite what she screamed at me in the boardroom. I moved her into a highly rated private assisted living facility in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta. It has manicured gardens, round-the-clock medical care, and a dining room that serves hot meals 3 times a day. I pay the exorbitant monthly bill directly from my corporate accounts, so she will never have to worry about a roof over her head. But that is where my obligation entirely ends. I pay for her physical survival, but I have permanently revoked her access to my emotional life. I do not visit her. I do not call her on holidays. I changed my personal phone number and instructed the facility staff to firmly reject any forwarded messages or letters. She lives a comfortable but entirely isolated life, left alone with the crushing realization that she sacrificed her only loyal daughter for a son who threw her legacy away. She has a warm bed and a safe room, but she no longer has a family. The toxic tie has been completely severed and cauterized, allowing me to finally move forward in total peace. I walked away from the wreckage of their ruined lives, and I never once looked back. Tonight, the storm has finally passed. I am sitting alone on the long, dark velvet sofa in my penthouse library. The sprawling city of Atlanta glitters brightly through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, stretching out for miles beneath my feet. I reach over to the heavy oak side table and pour myself a generous glass of aged bourbon. The heavy crystal tumbler feels perfectly solid and cool against the palm of my hand. I lean back slowly, sinking deep into the plush cushions. I raise the glass of amber liquid toward the window, offering a silent toast to the quiet peace I have finally secured. If there is one absolute truth you take away from my story, let it be this. This entire ordeal was never really about a counterfeit handbag, a leased luxury car, or even a stolen family estate. It was a definitive masterclass in the lethal power of absolute silence. For every single Black woman out there listening to my voice right now, for every woman who is constantly underestimated, chronically overlooked, or maliciously belittled by the very people who are supposed to protect and uplift you, I need you to hear me clearly. True wealth does not need to scream. It does not need to announce itself loudly at a crowded country club dinner, or demand cheap validation from a rented designer outfit. You absolutely do not have to exhaust your beautiful spirit trying to prove your worth to ignorant people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. When they judge you by your plain clothes, your quiet demeanor, or your modest lifestyle, let them. When they project their own miserable, crippling insecurities onto your life, simply smile and let them build their fragile delusions. You do not need to fight loud, exhausting emotional battles to defend your dignity. Anger and arguments only feed their toxic energy. Instead, let their blinding arrogance dig their own graves. Your only job is to stay completely silent and remain relentlessly focused on your ultimate goal. Work hard in the shadows. Build your massive empire brick by quiet brick in a place where they cannot possibly see it. Consolidate your power, educate your mind, and fiercely secure your financial independence. Because when the time finally comes to balance the scales and permanently shift the dynamic, you will not need to raise your voice or shed a single tear. You will simply sit at the head of the table and let the ruthless legal system, the certified property deeds, and your overflowing bank statements do all the talking for you. Let them choke on the absolute undeniable reality of your monumental success. I take a slow, satisfying sip of the bourbon, letting the smooth warmth settle deep in my chest. If my journey resonated with your spirit today, if you truly understand the sheer, terrifying power of moving in absolute silence and letting your ultimate success be your revenge, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and join a growing community of powerful women who know exactly how to play the long corporate game. Drop a comment below and tell me how you are quietly building your own untouchable empire. Until next time, stay relentlessly focused, stay completely unbothered, and never ever let them see you coming.